The attic studio smelled of turpentine and cold November rain tapping against the skylight. At 55, Simon Calder had turned the top floor of his narrow, Victorian house in Asheville into the one place where the world couldn't reach him. He painted late into the night, large canvases full of storms and half-remembered coastlines, because pigment and solvent were easier to control than people. Tonight the canvas was blank, and that felt honest. Downstairs, the refrigerator hummed too loudly in a house that had been built for a family and now held only one man and the echo of the family that had left. His daughter Nora was driving down from Charlottesville for the weekend. At 31, she had the kind of career something in nonprofit grant writing that required her to sound perpetually optimistic on the phone. Even when she was bone-tired, Simon understood the performance. He'd spent decades perfecting his own version of it. He was wiping brushes when his phone buzzed. On my way. Hope that's okay. Long story. Love you. Simon stared at the text longer than necessary. Stray. Nora had always collected broken-winged things, birds with bent feathers. Classmates who ate lunch alone, boyfriends who needed fixing. He sighed, pulled a second steak from the freezer, and set an extra place at the table out of habit more than generosity. The gravel crunched. Under tires at 8:47 p.m., Nora's headlights swept across the windows like searchlights. Simon watched from the porch as she climbed out of the car. Red hair twisted into a knot, wearing the same ancient army jacket she'd stolen from him in high school. She hugged him hard, smelling of coffee and highway. Behind her, the passenger door opened more slowly. "This is Levi," she said, stepping aside. "Levi, my dad." The man who unfolded himself from the little Honda was tall, the way pines are tall, straight, unapologetic, and slightly weathered. 34? Maybe skin the color of river stone after rain. Close-cropped hair going silver at the temples far too early. Eyes the pale gray-green of tide pools. He wore a faded black hoodie and carried a canvas duffel that looked like it had circled the world twice. When he smiled small, polite, exhausted, Simon saw the faint white line of a scar that started at his left ear, disappeared into the collar of his shirt. "Mr. Calder?" Levi said, offering a hand that was calloused and paint-flecked. An artist's hand, Simon noted with involuntary interest. "I'm sorry to impose." Nora insisted. "Simon," he corrected automatically, "and you're not imposing until you refuse the bourbon." Inside, the house did what it always did. It wrapped around guests like an old dog that refuses to believe anyone could truly want to leave. Nora kicked off her boots, raided the fridge for beer, and launched into a loud, animated recap of the conference she'd just fled in Richmond. Levi sat on the edge of the couch as though ready to bolt, nodding in the right places, laughing only when Nora elbowed him. Simon watched the way Levi's fingers worried the frayed cuff of his sleeve, the way his gaze drifted to the staircase that led up to the studio. Hungry the way only people who make things recognize in each other. They ate in the kitchen because of the dining room. Felt funereal these days. Simon had cooked the way he painted, too much color, too much heat, too much hope that flavor could fill silence. Chili with dark chocolate and ancho, cornbread that rose like forgiveness. Nora talked enough for 3 people. Levi ate slowly, carefully. As though taste itself were a foreign country, he was relearning how to enter. After dinner, out. Nora's phone erupted with work emails. She groaned, kissed Simon on the cheek, and disappeared upstairs to put out one tiny fire. The sudden quiet in the kitchen felt enormous. Simon poured 2 glasses of bourbon and handed one to Levi without asking. "You paint." "Not a question?" Levi's eyebrows rose. "Obvious. Your hands. And the way you looked at my stairs like you were already calculating how many canvases you could carry up them at once." A surprised huff of laughter. "Occupational hazard." Levi rolled the glass between his palms. "I haven't touched a brush in 4 months." Amon waited. He had learned that silence was often kinder than questions. Levi exhaled. There was a fire. "My studio in Raleigh. Everything gone. Insurance is complicated. I've been crashing on friends' couches, trying to figure out what you do when the thing that kept you breathing turns to ash. Ah! Almost clinical, but his knuckles went white around the glass. Simon felt the words land somewhere behind his sternum. Familiar as grief. 20 years ago, his own work oils, huge turbulent skies, had been shown in a prestigious gallery in Charlotte. The night of the opening, his wife Elise told him she was leaving, took their savings, took Nora for half the year, left Simon with a house too big and a reputation that suddenly felt borrowed. He had painted nothing but gray for 18 months. He cleared his throat. Top floor is an attic studio. North light. It's yours for the weekend if you want it. Longer, if you need. Levi looked at him then. Really looked, and Simon felt the years between them collapse like paper held too close to flame. 31 years, give or take? An entire lifetime. And yet the recognition was instantaneous. Two men who had built their lives out of color and then watched the color drain away. I couldn't, Levi started. You can. I have more paint than sense. And the guest room has a lock if I start hovering. Smile ghosted across Levi's mouth, crooked and real. You always take in your daughter's strays. Only the ones who flinch when they hear sirens. Something softened in Levi's shoulders. He raised his glass. 2 generous hosts and second chances. Then, the bourbon was 30 years old, a gift from a client who never paid the final invoice. It tasted like smoke and regret and the faintest trace of honey. Later, after Nora had fallen asleep to the sound of rain on the tin roof of the porch, Simon found himself in the studio rearranging brushes that didn't need rearranging. The skylight was a square of wet black. He thought about going downstairs, pouring another drink. Pretending he wasn't listening for footsteps on the attic stairs. They came just after midnight. Bare feet on old pine. Levi appeared in the doorway wearing one of Simon's old paint shirts, sleeves rolled high, carrying 2 fresh canvases Simon hadn't touched in a decade. I couldn't sleep, Levi said quietly. Hope you don't mind? Simon stepped aside. Plenty of room. They worked without speaking. Simon mixed cerulean and burnt umber until the color felt like dusk over the Blue Ridge. Levi painted with fierce economy. Broad strokes that looked like surrender and defiance all at once. Hours slipped past, unmarked. At some point their shoulders brushed, reaching for the same tube of titanium white. Neither moved away. Dawn found them sitting on the floor, backs against the wall, covered in paint and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes after telling the truth without words. The canvases stood like silent witnesses. One storm-torn sky shot through with unexpected gold. One horizon that refused to end in darkness. Levi spoke first, voice rough. I thought I was done. With all of it. Simon studied the younger man's profile, the sharp cut of cheekbone, the scar catching the first pale light. He felt something shift inside his chest, tectonic and irreversible. You're not done, he said. You're just beginning again. Difference is subtle, but absolute. Levi turned his head. Their faces were very close. Simon could smell turpentine and bourbon and the particular warmth of another human who had decided, for one fragile moment, to stay. Simon, Levi said, testing the name like a brushstroke he wasn't sure would hold. Simon waited. He had waited years for many things. A minute more was nothing. Levi leaned in, slow enough for denial, fast enough for courage. Their lips met tentative, then not. It tasted like waking up after a long illness and realizing you were hungry again. When they pulled apart, Levi rested his forehead against Simon's. I'm still a mess, he whispered. Good, Simon answered. I've got plenty of drop cloths. Outside the rain had stopped. The mountains were turning the color of forgiveness. Inside the attic, 2 men who had believed themselves finished with desire discovered that some fires, once reduced to ash, only need the smallest breath to flare back to life. Downstairs. Nora would wake in a few hours and find the coffee already made, 2 mugs instead of 1, and footprints of ultramarine leading up the stairs like breadcrumbs. She would smile the slow, knowing smile of a daughter who had always understood her father better than he understood himself, and in the studio. Under the steady north light, Simon and Levi began again, one careful stroke at a time. The rain in Asheville, North Carolina, had a personality of its own. Soft, relentless, and unapologetic, it draped the Blue Ridge Mountains in a misty veil that November afternoon. Inside the cedar-clad cabin nestled on the edge of town, the air smelled of wood smoke and coffee. Noah Caldwell, 55, silver-haired, and quietly commanding in the way only a man who'd spent decades designing homes that felt like sanctuaries could be, stood at the kitchen counter, pouring a second cup for his guest, Levi Harper, 32, with dark curls that refused to obey gravity and eyes that carried too much recent sorrow, sat at the island. Wrapped in one of Noah's old flannel shirts, because his own clothes were still damp from the downpour when he'd arrived the night before, Levi's best friend, Sarah Noah's daughter, had insisted he come. "You need to get out of Charlotte," she'd said over the phone, her voice firm but kind. "Dad's place is quiet. You can breathe there," Levi hadn't argued. He'd been drowning in his own life for months, and the idea of mountains and silence had felt like mercy. But Sarah wasn't here now. An emergency at the hospital, where she worked as a pediatric surgeon, had pulled her back to the city before dawn. She'd apologized profusely, her voice crackling over the phone as Noah held it to his ear in the hallway. "I hate leaving him like this, Dad. He's fragile right now. Just be gentle with him, okay?" Noah had chuckled softly. "I'm always gentle, Sarah, I know," she'd said. "But I mean really gentle. Like you were with me after Mom died, that had stopped him." He'd promised. And now, here they were, two near strangers in a house built for solitude, with nothing but rain and time between them. Levi looked up as Noah slid the mug across the counter. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away immediately. "Sarah said you got called in," Levi said, voice still rough from sleep. I can head out if you need the place to yourself." Noah shook his head. "Stay. It's pouring. And I make a decent breakfast." Levi smiled, small and uncertain, but real. "Okay?" They moved easily after that, as if they'd done this before. Noah cracked eggs into a bowl with the confidence of someone who'd cooked for one for far too long. Levi leaned against the counter, watching. "You don't have to entertain me," Levi said. "I'm not," Noah replied. "I'm feeding you. There's a difference." Levi laughed soft, surprised, like he'd forgotten he knew how. They talked. Not about the weather or the drive up the mountain. Real things. Levi told him about Eli, his partner of 6 years, the one who'd said Levi was too sensitive and not driven enough, who'd wanted him to be softer in public and sharper in private, who'd wanted him to want less and need more, all at once. How Levi had tried to be everything and ended up being nothing. How he'd come home one day to find Eli gone, a note on the counter that said, "I need someone who fits." Noah listened without interrupting, the way people do when they've heard versions of their own story before. When Levi finished, the kitchen was quiet except for the rain. Noah set a plate in front of him, perfectly folded omelet, toast with blackberry jam he'd made last summer, a side of sliced avocado. "I was with someone for 21 years, Noah said finally, sitting across from him. His name was Daniel. He wanted me to be proud, out loud. In 2003, that felt like asking me to set myself on fire for his principles. But he also wanted me quiet at dinner parties, discreet with clients. He wanted to be the brave one, and me to be the safe one. I spent 2 decades trying to be both. Eventually, you run out of oxygen." Levi looked at him, really looked. "How did you survive that?" "I left," Noah said simply. "Took me until I was 50 to do it. Built this house with the money from the divorce. Designed every inch of it myself. Took me 3 years to stop expecting him to walk through the door." Levi's throat worked. "I don't know how to start over." "You don't have to know yet," Noah said. "You just have to not disappear." After breakfast, Noah showed him the Studio A glass-walled room overlooking the valley, filled with rolls of blueprints, models of homes made from balsa wood and clay, photographs pinned to corkboards, homes with wraparound porches and hidden gardens, a treehouse suspended between 2 ancient oaks, a tiny cabin with a living roof of wildflowers. Levi touched one of the models gently, reverently. "You make people homes where they can be someone." "I try," Noah said. "I used to think beauty was enough. Then I realized people don't just need beautiful spaces. They need spaces that let them remember who they are when the world forgets." Levi's eyes filled. He didn't blink it away. They spent the afternoon that weighed Noah, showing him decades of work. Levi asking questions that went deeper than surface admiration. Why this angle of light? Why this tree here and not there? How do you design a home for someone who's lost everything? By late afternoon, the rain had softened to a whisper. Noah suggested they cook dinner together. Levi admitted he could burn water. Noah laughed, deep, warm, surprised at himself. He taught Levi how to make risotto, slowly, patiently, standing close enough that Levi could smell cedar and coffee on his skin. Noah's hand rested briefly on Levi's as he showed him how to stir slow circles. No rushing. "Risotto forgives a lot," Noah murmured, "but not impatience." Their shoulders brushed. Neither moved away when they sat down to eat creamy mushroom risotto. A salad of winter greens with pomegranate and candied pecans. Warm sourdough. The light had turned to amber through the clouds. The mountains were invisible now, swallowed by mist. Levi looked at Noah across the table and said, very quietly, "I haven't felt seen in a long time." "You are? Right now. Exactly as you are." Something shifted in the room. Not dramatic. Not sudden. Just true. Later, when the dishes were done and the fire was crackling low, Levi stood at the window, watching the rain. Noah came up behind him, not touching, just close enough to feel. "You can stay as long as you need," Noah said. Levi turned. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't want to be someone you're kind to because you feel sorry for me." Noah's eyes were steady. "I don't feel sorry for you, Levi. I recognize you." With the rain falling like forgiveness outside, Levi leaned forward just slightly and rested his forehead against Noah's shoulder. Noah's arms came up slowly. Carefully, like he was afraid Levi might vanish. He didn't. Outside, the mountains held their breath. Inside, two men who had spent years making themselves small for other people began, very quietly, to take up space again. It wasn't a beginning with trumpets or declarations. It was just rain and firelight and the slow, deliberate choice to be seen, and for the first time in a very long time, that was enough. The rain came down in sheets, the kind of relentless Pacific Northwest downpour that made the world feel smaller, cozier, and more dangerous all at once. Alexander stood at the stove in his craftsman house on the edge of Capitol Hill, sleeves rolled up, stirring risotto with slow, deliberate circles. The kitchen smelled of arborio rice, white wine, and the faint cedar smoke drifting in from the fireplace he'd lit earlier. He was 54, silver threading through his dark hair, and he had not expected company this weekend. Let alone this particular company. Julian appeared in the doorway, barefoot, hair still damp from the shower, wearing one of Alexander's old Yale sweatshirts that hung loose on his narrower frame. At 27, Julian looked like someone who had been through something and hadn't entirely come out the other side yet. His eyes, hazel shot through with green, carried a permanent wariness. But tonight, softened by 2 glasses of Barolo and the warmth of the house, they looked almost peaceful. "You didn't have to cook for me," Julian said, leaning against the counter. "I was planning to live on cereal and self-loathing for 3 days. Alexander gave a low laugh. "I've been there. Risotto is better." They ate at the small table by the window that overlooked the wet garden. The city lights shimmered through the rain like scattered coins. Julian told stories about the tech startup that had imploded, about the boyfriend who'd left the day the funding fell through, about driving north from San Francisco with no plan except to outrun the silence in his apartment. Alexander listened more than he spoke, refilling Julian's glass, asking gentle questions that made the younger man open up in a way clearly hadn't in months. After dinner, they moved to the living room. Alexander put on Bill Evans, the piano notes floating soft and blue through the dim light. The fire snapped inside. They sat on opposite ends of the leather sofa at first, a careful distance, but the conversation pulled them closer. Julian talked about growing up in Ohio, about realizing at 14 that he was never going to want what everyone else seemed to want. Alexander talked about his marriage that had ended not in fireworks, but in a quiet, mutual recognition that love could curdle into politeness. About coming out at 41 to a teenage daughter who'd simply said, "Okay, Dad, cool?" and then asked if they were still doing pizza on Friday. They talked until the bottle was empty and the space between them on the couch had shrunk to nothing. Julian turned, tucking one leg beneath himself. "Do you ever, after everything, do you still believe it's possible? Finding someone? Not just sex. Someone who sees you." Alexander looked at him for a long moment. The firelight painted gold across Julian's cheekbones, caught in the faint stubble he hadn't bothered to shave. "I used to think age made you wiser about that sort of thing," Alexander said quietly. "Turns out it mostly just makes you more cautious." "I don't feel cautious right now," Julian said. The air in the room changed, grew heavier, charged. Alexander felt it settle in his chest like a hand. "Julian," he started, voice rougher than he intended. "You're staying in my house because my daughter asked me to look after her friend? You've had a brutal month." He stopped, not sure how to finish the sentence without sounding pathetic or predatory, or both. Julian moved first. Not far, just enough to close the gap. To rest his forehead against Alexander's. "I know all the reasons this is complicated," he whispered. "I also know I haven't felt safe anywhere in weeks, and I feel safe here. With you." Alexander's hand came up almost of its own accord, fingers sliding into Julian's hair. It was softer than he expected. Julian's breath trembled against his lips. "Tell me to stop," Julian said. So quietly it was barely sound. Alexander didn't. The kiss was slow at first. Careful, like they were both afraid the other might vanish. Then Julian made a small broken sound and pressed closer, and caution burned away like morning fog. Alexander tasted wine and want, and something that felt dangerously like hope. Julian's hands found the back of his neck, thumbs stroking just beneath the hairline. And Alexander felt himself come undone in a way he hadn't in years. They kissed for a long time, long enough for the record, too. End, and the fire to sink into glowing coals. Hands stayed respectful mostly, but the intent was unmistakable. When they finally pulled apart, foreheads still touching, Julian laughed once, shaky and incredulous. "I did not see this coming when I got in the car in San Francisco. Neither did I when I said yes to letting you stay," Alexander admitted. Julian's fingers traced the collar of Alexander's shirt, hesitant. "I should. Probably go upstairs. Probably should," Alexander agreed. But neither of them moved. Eventually, Julian stood, offering a hand. Alexander took it, let himself be pulled up. At the foot of the stairs, Julian paused, turned back. "Thank you," he said simply. "For dinner. For the fire. For this." Alexander brushed a thumb across Julian's lower lip, still swollen from kissing. "Good night, Julian. Good night, Alex." Neither of them slept. Alexander lay in the dark, listening to the house settle around him, every creak sounding like footsteps that never came. Across the hall, Julian stared at the guest room ceiling, touching his mouth again and again, wondering how it was possible to feel this awake and this terrified at the same time. Morning came too soon. The rain had thinned to a drizzle, and the world outside looked rinsed clean. Alexander was at the stove again, making eggs he didn't taste. When Julian came down in yesterday's jeans and another borrowed sweater, this one dark green cashmere that made his eyes look almost gold, they moved around each other like magnets, unsure of their polarity close. Then too close, then retreating. Julian poured coffee with exaggerated focus. Alexander buttered toast that didn't need buttering. Finally, Julian set his mug down with a small click. "So," he said. Last night, Alexander leaned back against the counter, arms folded. The caution had returned full force in daylight. "Last night was real," Julian finished firmly. "At least for me. I know it's fast. I know I'm a mess. I know you're—" he gestured vaguely, encompassing the 15-inch height difference. The 27-year age gap. The fact that Julian had once babysat Alexander's daughter when she was 9. I know all of it. And I still mean it. Alexander exhaled slowly. I'm not good at this, Julian. The last time I felt anything this strong, I was 30 and stupid. Now I'm 54 and less stupid, but significantly more breakable. Julian stepped closer, close enough that Alexander could smell his own soap on Julian's skin. I'm not asking you to marry me, Alex. I'm asking you to not decide this is impossible before we've even had breakfast. Alexander looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached out, tucked a stray curl behind Julian's ear. Eat your eggs, he said gruffly. We'll figure out the rest after caffeine. Julian smiled, small, crooked, and utterly unguarded, and something in Alexander's chest unclenched for the first time in years. Outside, the clouds began to part, letting thin winter suns spill across the wet city. Inside, 2 men sat at a kitchen table with plates of eggs and toast, and the fragile, astonishing possibility of something neither of them had thought to hope for anymore. The rain had stopped, but something else had unmistakably begun. The rain in San Francisco that Sunday morning was soft, almost apologetic, as if the city itself didn't want to disturb what was happening inside the old Victorian on Noah. Alex set his coffee down and looked across the kitchen island at Leo. Okay, he said, the word quiet but steady. That wasn't the answer I thought I'd get. Leo, 29, still in the same gray hoodie he'd worn when he showed up unannounced on Friday night, rubbed the back of his neck. Fair, but can I say something that's going to sound insane? Alex lifted an eyebrow. At 51, he had learned not to flinch at insane. Go ahead. I came here to hide, Leo said. My ex-girlfriend of 6 years told me 3 weeks ago that she'd been in love with her thesis advisor the whole time. She moved out while I was at work. I couldn't breathe in Seattle. I told everyone I needed a long weekend in wine country, but really, I just got in the car and drove south until the road felt far enough. I didn't even book a hotel. I ended up on your doorstep because you once told me 8 years ago at that awful Christmas party Julian dragged me to, that if I ever needed a couch in San Francisco, you had one. Alex remembered the party. He remembered the skinny college kid who'd looked overwhelmed by the adults and had spent most of the night talking to Alex about succulents because they were the only thing he knew anything about. And then, Leo continued, voice catching just slightly. In 48 hours, you made me remember what it feels like to want tomorrow. Not just being around you. I don't know what that means yet, but I know I don't want to leave without finding out if it could mean something. Alex studied him, the dark circles under Leo's eyes that hadn't quite faded. The way his hands kept flexing like he was still trying to hold on to something that had already slipped away. He thought of David, gone for years now, and how grief had made him careful the way a burn makes you afraid of fire. I don't know if it's wrong, he said finally. I only know it's fast, and I'm too old to do fast without being honest about the consequences. He paused. Ask me again, after you've gone back north and sat with it for a week. Ask me when the rain up there feels like home again and you still want to get on I-5 South. Ask me when you're sure I'm not just the nearest safe harbor after a storm pushed you into.
House.
Leo's mouth twisted, half smile, half grimace. And if I do all that, and the answer's still yes? Then we try, Alex said. But Leo, listen carefully. I won't be the anecdote you tell your friends about the hot older guy who helped you get over your ex. I won't be the rebound you're ashamed of later. If we do this, we do it in daylight. Leo nodded slowly. I don't have any practice at daylight, he admitted. But I want to learn. They left the dishes in the sink and drove out to Land's End because the rain had paused and the light over the Pacific was that impossible silver that only happens in November. Alex pointed out the community garden plots he tended, the succulents he'd propagated from cuttings David had loved. They walked the trail above the cliffs, wind whipping their jackets. And Leo reached for Alex's hand without asking. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. They ate crab rolls sitting on the hood of Alex's car. Legs dangling, watching container ships crawl under the Golden Gate. Leo told him about the ex, Mara, how she'd said he was safe, and that safe had started to feel like nothing. Alex told him about David's last year, the hospital smells. The way love sometimes ends in fluorescent quiet instead of fireworks. By late afternoon, they were in Golden Gate Park, under the dripping redwoods, and Leo stopped walking. "I'm terrified," he said. "Of what?" "That I'm going to wake up in my apartment in Capitol Hill tomorrow and realize this was a fever dream. That I'll text you and you'll have come to your senses. That I already miss you and you're standing right here." Alex pulled him close, felt the younger man's heartbeat hammering against his own ribs. "I'm terrified too," he said into Leo's hair. "But we're here now. Let's not borrow tomorrow's panic." They went back to the house on Noah Hill as the streetlights flickered on. They made love slowly, deliberately, the way people do when they know every touch might have to last a long time. There was no rush, only questions whispered against skin. "Is this okay? Does this feel good? Tell me what you need." Afterward, Leo traced the silver in Alex's chest hair like he was reading Braille. "I have to drive back tomorrow," Leo said into the dark. "I have a presentation Tuesday I can't miss." "I know. I want to come back next weekend." "If that's insane, tell me now." "It's insane," Alex said, smiling against his temple. "Come anyway. And the weekend after, will you come to Seattle? Meet my friends as whatever we are by then." Alex laughed softly. "Yes. God help me, yes." Monday morning, Leo left before dawn. He kissed Alex on the doorstep in the cold, fog curling around them like it wanted to keep them together. Alex watched the taillights of Leo's Subaru disappear down 24th. Street and felt something in his chest both open and ache at the same time. 3 weeks later, Alex took the red-eye to Seattle. Leo met him at baggage claim holding a ridiculous bouquet of dahlias and wearing the same gray hoodie. They drove across the 520 bridge with the city lights shimmering on the lake, Leo's hand resting on Alex's thigh the whole way. That night, tangled in Leo's sheets in a tiny apartment full of half-dead plants Leo swore he was working on, Alex realized the fear hadn't gone away. It had just changed shape. No longer the fear that this was temporary, but the sharper, brighter fear that it might not be. Leo pressed his face into Alex's neck. "Ask me again," he whispered. "Ask you what?" "If it's still yes?" Alex smiled in the dark. "Is it?" Leo's answer was immediate, fierce, almost laughing. "God, yes. Every day, it's more yes." Outside, Seattle rain tapped against the windows like it was applauding. Inside, two men who had both thought their stories were mostly written discovered there were whole chapters still blank, waiting. The morning came in pale gold through the tall windows of the old house in Charlottesville. The kind of light that makes even saying goodbye feel sacred. Alexander Grant, 51, silver just beginning to thread his temples, zipped the small leather overnight bag he'd brought from Richmond. In the kitchen, Noah Caldwell, 27, barefoot in Alexander's borrowed sweatpants, was making pancakes with unnecessary concentration. As though perfect circles could postpone the inevitable, they had spent 48 hours learning the precise weight of each other's silences. Now the weekend was ending, and the air felt bruised with tenderness. At the door, Alexander reached for Noah first. "Thank you," he said, voice low. "For not running when you realized who I was to Liam." Noah laughed once, soft and rueful. "I almost did. Friday night, after the bonfire, I stood in the guest room with my phone in my hand, ready to call an Uber to the train station. Then you came in with that ridiculous book about Byzantine mosaics and asked if I wanted to see the pictures. You actually listened when I talked. I couldn't leave after that." Alexander kissed him slowly, deliberately, as if memorizing the shape of the moment. When Noah's Jeep finally crunched down the gravel drive and disappeared behind the oaks, Alexander stayed on the porch a long time. The house settled around him like it always, yet nothing was the same. He had spent 25 years being the man his late wife needed, then 10 more being the father Liam needed, and then simply the man who could survive alone. In 2 days, this quiet graduate student was Stormcloud. Eyes had reminded him that wanting was still allowed. That evening, his phone lit up. "Noah, home safe. Already planning the next time I can kidnap you. Also, I miss the way you say my name when you're half asleep. This is going to be insane, isn't it? Alexander smiled, thumbs hovering, then typed, "Yes, insane and necessary. Worth it, I think." The next 10 weeks were a careful geography of miles and minutes. Noah drove down from D.C. with overnight bags and houseplants he swore would survive neglect. Alexander took the train north with a suitcase of books and the growing conviction that he was too old for this and too alive to stop. They learned that Noah took his coffee black but sweet, that Alexander slept on the left side of the bed even when alone, that Noah hummed when nervous and Alexander traced invisible patterns on any nearby skin when thinking. Noah told him about growing up in a house where his father's disapproval had its own chair at the dinner table. Alexander told him about the particular exhaustion of smiling in hospital corridors while Alina faded. They spoke of these things in the dark, limbs tangled, as if darkness made confession safer. Liam called in early May. So his son began. "Amusement thick, you and Noah." Alexander's heart stuttered. "He told you?" "He didn't have to. You've sent him a good morning text every single day for 71 days. You once forgot my birthday, Dad." Also, he glows now. He uses the word future in casual conversation like it's not a miracle. "He's in love with you." Alexander closed his eyes. "And you're okay with that?" "Dad, I invited him home because he looked lonely at Christmas. I didn't expect you to keep him, but I've never seen you soft like this." "You deserve soft. He deserves someone who looks at him like he hung the moon. Just don't make it weird when I visit." Alexander laughed, the sound startling him with its ease. A week later, Noah got the offer from the Smithsonian. Benefits, the kind of job people his age prayed for. It would keep him mostly in D.C., but the position allowed significant remote work. "We could make it work," Noah said that night in Alexander's kitchen. Watching him attempt risotto with the solemnity of a man defusing a bomb, "We're good at making it work." Alexander turned from the stove. "I love you." The words hung between them like a held breath. Noah's face went still. He closed the small distance, slid his arms around Alexander's waist from behind, pressed his cheek between shoulder blades. "I know you're scared," Noah murmured against his shirt. "I'm terrified, but I needed to say it." Alexander set the spoon down, turned, cupped Noah's face. "I'm falling so hard I can't see the ground," he said. "I'm just waiting for the crash. Then we crashed together," Noah answered, simple and certain. They kept building, slow, deliberate, realistic. Noah kept his D.C. apartment for the weeks he had to be on site. Alexander kept the Charlottesville house that creaked like an old ship. They met in the middle, literally on weekends, in Fredericksburg Bedan breakfasts, or in the quiet spaces between obligations. They learned how to fight quietly, precisely, with the door closed so the words didn't scatter, and how to make up even better. 5 months in, on a warm September evening, they stood in the overgrown backyard Alexander had let go wild after Alina died. Noah had his hands in the pockets of one of Alexander's old linen shirts, sleeves rolled high. "I want to fix this," Alexander said, gesturing at the tangle of roses and weeds. "Make it ours. A table where we can eat outside. A hammock. Those ridiculous blue flowers you like, delphiniums," Noah supplied, grinning. "Those. I want to sit here with you when we're 70 and argue about whose turn it is to mow." Noah stepped closer. "You planning on keeping me that long, Professor?" Alexander pulled him in until their foreheads touched. "I fought it," he whispered. "I told myself I was too old, too careful, too damaged. But Noah Caldwell, I am completely, stupidly, permanently in love with you." Noah's eyes filled, but his smile was radiant. He kissed Alexander like a promise kept, like a door flung wide. Years later, friends would ask how it happened, how. Liam's quiet friend from grad school became the man who redesigned Alexander's garden and his life. Alexander would only smile and say, "He stayed." And on spring evenings when the delphiniums were tall and the light was the color of the first night, they almost lost each other. Noah would lean against him on the porch they'd built together and murmur, "Just my friend's dad," and Alexander would answer, "Until you weren't," and they would laugh like people who know exactly how rare it is to land softly after falling so far.